This is, as you know, part of a whole series. And about 2 years ago, Reverend Dr. David McMaster and I sat down in his office and we said, you know, we really need to address what it means to be a Christian in our day and age, and to address it from a practical point of view. And arising out of that came the Being Christian conference of last fall, which I think most of you, if not all of you, attended. And it was a great success. But as a result of it, there were many questions left unanswered. How do we share our faith? How do we move our faith forward? And so the Christian Ed Committee and David and myself and Emma, we all put our heads together and felt that tonight's event would be a wonderful way of following up on what had begun in the fall. To bring somebody in, though, to take on such a task required quite a bit of effort, because who do you get to help us really reflect on sharing our faith and being Christian in 2017? And one name came to our mind, and that was Dr. Judy Paulsen of Wycliffe College. And we're really privileged tonight to have Judy with us. I've been privileged to have known Judy for many years and have actually heard her preach at St. Paul's, and have been in many meetings with her at Wycliffe College, where you know I'm involved. And Judy is an absolutely outstanding individual to help us with this evening's issues. She is the professor of evangelism and director of the Institute of Evangelism at Wycliffe College. And while she has amassed great academic credentials, she has a BA from the University of Western Ontario, an MSCA from McGill, a Master of Divinity from Wycliffe College, and a Doctorate of Ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary in California. She has drawn on a much greater experience in her life because she grew up as the daughter of Anglican missionaries in northwest India. And we were just looking at the sanctuary tonight and here at Timothy Eaton, and for Judy the first time, and she commented how the Holman hunt really in a sense was an image that she had from her times when she was in India, and how it brought back such fond memories of her life growing up there. But apart from the great background that she has and the academic background, what you'll find in Judy is the passion for the faith that comes out in everything that she says and does. She oozes evangelism and a love for God and Jesus Christ and a love for the church. And that her great desire and a great passion, and you only have to be around her for 5 minutes to realize that she loves people, and she loves people who can walk with Christ in their daily lives. And so we really are privileged to have Judy with us tonight. I'm not going to say any more because she will speak for herself. But I do want to welcome Judy to Timothy Eaton Memorial Church, say how wonderful it is that you would take this evening to do this with us, and we look forward to you ministering to us and helping us through this very, very important topic of how do we share our faith. Welcome to Timothy Eaton, Judy.
It is a joy to be here. Shall we start with a word of prayer? Lord, we give thanks that we know you, when so many know of something that is missing in their lives, and they don't even yet know that it is a longing for you. So we give thanks for each one that's here this night, and we pray, Lord, that you would be at work in us and in this world that you love. Guide all that we do this night. Draw us close to you so that we may serve you. And we pray this as our deepest longing. In Jesus' name, amen. I do this. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm going to use this to look at my notes, and I'll look you over the top of my glasses, but it's not that I'm being a teacher or angry at you or anything like that. It's just so I can see. Okay, so I was so excited to get a call to come and speak to Timothy Eaton Memorial about sharing faith. Of course, all mainline denominations, and not just the mainline denominations, but everybody today is having to think about how, as everyday Christians, we share our faith, because we live in present-day Canada, in which 85% of Canadians will talk about the fact that they believe there is a God of some sort, and actually from time to time will pray. 85%. But less than 20% have a church home. Now that tells us something. That tells us that there's actually a lot of people out there with questions, curious, people with longings. So how is it that we can again stir up the church to share what we all know? We're going to get there in a minute. But first, we're not alone. So someone said, well, you need to know something about Timothy. And I said, you know what? I speak in lots of churches, Presbyterian and United churches and Anglican churches. And guess what? Salvation Army churches and Christian Reformed churches. Everybody's having to learn again how to share their faith. Between 2004 and 2008, there was some really interesting research done it was called the Mainline Evangelism Project, funded by the Lilly Foundation. And they collected statistics from 30,000 churches in the United States. That's a lot of churches. 30,000 churches. They were looking for churches that were baptizing adults, because the baptism of adults is kind of adults that do not have any kind of prior church background. This is kind of the gold standard in evangelism, right? Reaching unchurched people. So out of that 30,000, they were looking for churches that were baptizing at least 1% of their church attendance. Only 1%. Now, out of that 30,000, can anybody guess how many churches they found? Now, these are primarily Caucasian and non-Southern churches from 7 denominations. Here are the denominations. American Baptist, Lutheran, Evangelical Lutheran that is, United Methodist, Disciples of Christ, Reformed, Church of Christ, and United Church of Christ. So apparently the Episcopalians didn't even make it into the research. I was shaking my head at that. But out of these 30,000, how many churches, any guesses as to how many churches were baptizing at least 1% of new adult, non-church people coming into the faith each year? Any guess?
All 7 faiths?
Take a wild guess as to the number of congregations out of 30,000.
10,000.
10,000?
1,000.
150. 150. So this begs the question, why is sharing our faith so distasteful? Because there's got to be something that is inhibiting all of these people. They're shy or they're inhibited to share their faith. So what makes evangelism, sharing faith, one person to another, so distasteful? Well, first of all, we all have some images in our head of evangelism, and they're not so good. So we have some mechanistic images. If you just say these words, you're in. But it doesn't feel right, does it? Somehow we know that it has to be more than that to become a Christian. Just saying some words on a page, simply praying a particular prayer. It feels mechanistic. sometimes the image of evangelism we have is objectifying. It's like, one more notch in my belt. I shared the faith with 5 people today, and I've got their names all written down here. Objectifying. After all, would any one of us want to be a notch in somebody's belt? Sometimes evangelism can seem triumphalistic. Accept it. You need this now. We can have that image of evangelism. How many of us would appreciate hearing that kind of message? In any case, guess what, folks? If there was a day in which maybe exceptional preachers could get away with a triumphalistic presentation of the faith, that day's gone. Long gone. What about the fact that some of us think of evangelism as quite disrespectful? We have an image that in our head that really, you really have to be an idiot to argue with my point about the faith. When we look at these things, we think, these can't be right, because this doesn't sound much like Jesus, right? But the truth is that these images come from somewhere. So I thought I'd show you a sign that I came across driving across Newfoundland a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. We came across this massive banner pegged up on a church in Newfoundland. It was so funny because I said to my husband, we have to go back. I have to get a picture of that for my evangelism class. Now, I want to say something, that it could be that God is going to use even something like this to stir somebody's curiosity or maybe stir something up in them. And so I will never say it's impossible for God to use any of these, what I would call unhelpful images of evangelism. But they are out there, and they actually can do a lot of harm. Because, first of all, many people in our society today don't actually believe in hell. So the idea of a hell in which they're going to burn, this is not the best place to start with them. Let's look at some other images for evangelism. This particular image comes from the UK, but I was actually down at Dundas and Young, and there was a street preacher out. He was preaching up a storm. He had a 3-piece suit on, and he was really preaching loudly because now again, I wouldn't say that there is nobody whose curiosity could be sparked. But the thing is that would you want to go up and engage this guy in conversation? I personally wouldn't. I'm an introvert. I think it's hilarious that God has an introvert as the professor of evangelism at Wycliffe College. But I would not be walking up to somebody that's got a megaphone and is looking this way. Now, here's an example of a sort of a mechanistic approach. This is taken from an evangelistic tract. A tract that was to teach people how to share the faith. And up at the top it says, your hand reaches to your shirt pocket. The movement is so natural that your prospect doesn't notice it. You don't take your eyes off from his face as you bring forth a copy of Beginning to Live. As you are doing this, say to him, God says that we are all sinners, as we see here in his word. Now, I have actually known people that came to faith through somebody sharing a little evangelistic tract with them. But does this give you a warm and fuzzy feeling? Doesn't this feel a little bit more like a sales job? There's something that's not very relational about this. I don't see anywhere in the New Testament that Jesus had a script. for how he related to people. So sometimes this can feel very mechanistic, and I don't advise students to take this approach. Well, what about putting it on your car? Now, for the introverts, this seems like a pretty good solution. But again, I'm not sure that this is the way to spark someone's curiosity. And yet, these are some of the most powerful images that we have of evangelism. What about a church sign? Talk about your mixed message. Okay, so besides the images in our head, maybe it's actually things that we've experienced that make us a little cautious about evangelism. So sometimes we've experienced an intrusive form of evangelism. The doorbell rings at supper time and there are two very well-dressed young men at your door with books. And you want to be polite, but you don't really want to engage because they don't know you. Now what's really funny is when we lived in Oshawa, where I pastored a church before I came to Wycliffe, for some reason, both the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons had not yet pegged our house as one to stay away from. So they would knock on our door frequently. And we actually got into some pretty good discussions. But they were definitely trying to impose something without there already being a relationship. And that felt very strange, especially to me as an introvert. So there was an intrusive nature to that image of evangelism. There's also the image of someone just going out in the neighborhood and passing out little information packets, maybe. They don't really want a relationship with you. They don't know you. You might actually already be a Christian and be worshiping regularly somewhere. And so there's a strangeness to that. Again, not to say that it could never be used by God, but that it doesn't feel terribly like something that Jesus would do. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Sometimes street preachers can seem pretty threatening. Anybody that's standing up on a soapbox yelling is automatically losing all the introverts in the crowd, and the extroverts, although they might be curious, are not necessarily going to be engaged. And then there's the bait and switch mode of evangelism. I knew of a woman close to me who I was visiting at her house, and she said, yeah, the strangest thing happened when our daughter was visiting her friend. She went over to her friend's house, and there on her friend's fridge was a picture of our family. And so Allie, her daughter, said to her friend, oh, why do you have a picture of our family on your fridge? And the other little girl said, because we're praying for you. Now this woman, who was not a Christian, she had thought that this family wanted to be friends with them. And now she felt something else was happening. So sometimes evangelism can feel a bit like a bait and switch. And again, I don't think that's what we see in the pages of Scripture. So anyway, we're now unpacking here. We're going to get some positive in a few minutes. Don't worry if I've depressed you too much right now. But I want to get at why we don't share our faith. So we've got these images in our head. There are these experiences that we have all lived. And there are some assumptions that we may hold. A third thing, these are positive things that we think about evangelists, I guess you could say. We see evangelists as being a brilliant communicator, a skilled apologist and philosopher. You know, somebody that can answer every single philosophical question that is put to them. That's an evangelist, some of us think. We believe that an evangelist has huge tracts of the Bible memorized. And we think of an evangelist as somebody that has a certain persevering personality. And guess what? How many here would describe themselves using this profile? Surprise, surprise. I was asked to preach at a church at St. Bartholomew's in Nashville. It's in the Bible Belt. You go into coffee shops in Nashville and you see people doing Bible study in the coffee shops. It's another world compared to Toronto. But when I was at St. Bartholomew's in Nashville, I said, and who are the evangelists among us today? No hands. Why? They also have this assumption about what an evangelist is. Well, then, finally, two more things that make evangelism really distasteful to us. First of all, there's the guilt. This is your Christian duty. Now, I won't say that duty is always a bad thing, but I wouldn't want my husband hanging around our marriage just out of duty. Right? I mean, duty is okay, but it's not what we really want. I want him there because he loves me. I know he wants me there because I love him. And so duty is a very poor substitute for love. And very few people are going to evangelize out of duty for all the other reasons we just covered. And here's the last reason I think we managed to avoid evangelism. It's a brilliant little escape clause found in Ephesians 4:11. Can anybody know this verse? Well, here it is. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. And this is the New English, but the NRSV says, and God gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. And so we all go, phew, because it's somebody else's gift, right? Anybody here guilty of this by any chance? No hands, okay. I can tell you for years, I was guilty of this. I assumed that somebody that was a bit on the shy side, I mean, I can get up and talk to people now. I've been doing it for years, and I've been, trained as a preacher. But it's not my bent to put myself out there. And at a cocktail party or something, that's my worst nightmare because I find it exhausting. So the thing is, I always assumed that the gift of evangelism must be somebody else's gift, because it was not my gift, because of all these assumptions I had. Well, guess what all of these things add up to? The majority of adult Christians in North America are not sharing their faith with anyone. That's just, the facts are clear on the page. whether you're talking about this research out of the United States or Canada. So I have a little question for you, a real quick question. I know you're all wondering about those evangelie cards. How many chose the evangelie cards first? Put your hand up if you chose one of those cards. Okay. Okay, so anybody just want to throw out, why did you choose the evangelie card? Who's, somebody
I didn't know
said?
what it meant. I knew it was an evangelist a little bit, but I feel Billy famous. But I didn't know what an evangelist was.
Okay, so out of curiosity, I love it. You took the card out of curiosity. Okay. What about the rest of you?
What is evangelie? I never heard that word before.
Okay. So this is an exercise I do at the very first lecture of one of my courses. And what I've noticed over the years is that if you think of an evangelist as someone sharing the faith, and evangelie as someone who is receiving that word. So the recipient of the gospel is an evangelie. It's not a real word, people, okay? So don't worry if you have not heard it before. But here's the thing. What I've noticed time and time again is that the evangelie cards all disappear before the evangelist cards go. So I'm pretty darn impressed tonight that some of you took evangelist cards. How many of you took evangelist cards? Look at this. That's awesome. So I want to hear, why did you take the evangelist card?
I know the meaning of it.
Okay, there was less hesitancy, less worry about what did this word mean. I like it.
You know, I had the same reason. I thought I knew something about that, and I didn't know about the other. I thought if we were on the spot, I could speak to that, but I couldn't speak to the other.
Okay.
Nobody else was taking it, so.
Right. Yeah.
I just took evangelie. That's one of my names, Christian names, Lee.
I love it. Okay, I've never heard that answer before. It's the first time for everything.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think the name was given popular at that time.
Cool. Well, the truth is that churches that I go and speak at, very few people identify themselves as an evangelist for many of the reasons that we've already covered. But what if we thought about evangelism using some different images? What if we thought about evangelism as inviting somebody into a dance?
Yay.
Who loves to dance here? I do. You know, a dance is something, there's music going on, and you can see that somebody's standing there and they're kind of tapping their feet or they're moving and nobody's invited them to dance. And you just invite them into this enjoyable movement. You're not forcing them into it, but it's a moving to the music, something that's beyond the both of you. So I love that image of evangelism, inviting someone to a dance. This image over here is actually a painting about the farmer who sows widely, the sower of the seed. So it's kind of crazy, isn't it? Because if you were a farmer today, you would never sow that way. Because it's too lavish, it's too generous. You're throwing seed away if you do that. But the image of evangelism as just throwing out seeds and seeing what begins to grow. And allowing the process of cultivation, because it is a process always, right? Sometimes you're removing stones, you're helping people maybe get over some pain, maybe with the church even, or maybe a question they've always had about Christianity, so you might just be removing stones from the field, or maybe you're planting some new thoughts about who this person is, Jesus Christ, and how we can take him seriously, what he might call us to. You have to wait when you're cultivating. You have to water, weed, you answer the questions, you wait some more. What if that was our image of evangelism? And then this image down here, it's called the evangelism metro. So it shows that somebody might be taking quite a different path. Up here, for instance, you've got, well, this person is a fellow passenger, and there's a caller at work, and over here is a chance meeting, and down here is a letter that's received, and then they're actually changing paths, and there's a dream that they have that they don't know how to make sense of, and they actually experience some healing for a past hurt, and on it goes. So evangelism can actually be quite a circumlocutus route that moves around, that involves many different people and many different things. If we had these images of evangelism, could we imagine ourselves as evangelists? Well, one of the things I like to do at Wycliffe, and I just basically revised the primary evangelism course at Wycliffe, because what I want to do is I want to teach the conversion stories of Scripture as the primary lens through which we learn about evangelism. So what I want to do now is I want to read for you a story from the Old Testament. As I read this story, and it's quite long, so hunker down, get another drink if you want. I want you to think about a couple of things. How did this great general come to faith? Who played a role? Think about all the different roles. Who said or did what? So this is from 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, and in high favor because of him, the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothes. Imagine they're all being woven by hand at this point, very expensive. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." Imagine how the king of Israel felt. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." But then Elisha, the man of God, the prophet, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes. He sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean. Goodbye." Well, Naaman was angry and went away saying, Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, Wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, and according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was made clean. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and he stood before him, and he said, Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But Elisha said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mules' loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant, that when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. Elisha said to him, Go in peace. But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, See, my master has spared this Naaman the Syrian in not accepting from his hand what he bought. As the Lord lives, I will run ahead after him and get something from him. So Gehazi followed Naaman, and when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, Is all well? And Gehazi said, All is well. My master has sent me to say, There have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 festal garments. And Naaman said, Be pleased to accept these 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags and the 2 festal garments and laid them on two of his servants, and they carried them before Gehazi. When he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house, and he sent the men away, and they departed. Then Gehazi went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, Where have you been, Gehazi? It's not going well for Gehazi at this point. He said, Your servant went nowhere. But he said to him, Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So he went out from his presence a leper like snow. Well, that's a serious ending to that story. So these 2 pictures are, of course, the slave girl. Here she is. this picture really captures the despair, doesn't it? You have this great general who is successful in all he does, has this great point of stature, lots of status, but he's got a problem he cannot solve. And his wife is also despairing of what is coming down the road for Naaman. And this picture I love this painting because it really captures the wealth of this home. It captures the despair of this home as well. And you know, all around us in the city of Toronto are some beautiful homes, and they have some despair in them. I love that this little girl has such a confident look in her face as she shares the one thing she knows. She has heard about this prophet from Samaria. And so that's all she says. But her words cause this kind of domino effect, don't they? You've got her telling her sphere of influence. She is not told Naaman. She's told Naaman's wife. Naaman's wife has told Naaman. Naaman tells the king of Syria. The king of Syria sends the letter to the king of Israel. Elisha hears about it. I mean, on and on it goes. And then the hilarious part is Naaman gets to the very place that he can be healed, and he almost misses out. And who does God use? Another nobody. That messenger, he's not even named in the text. He says, my master, if he'd asked you to do something difficult, you would have done it. So why would you not just go into the water? And it's because of the word of that messenger that Naaman experiences the living God. Over here, I love this is a slightly different rendition, isn't it? You've also got this longing in this beautiful woman, clearly a very prosperous home, and you've got this image of this slave girl who is coming to speak a word of hope. Now, this little slave girl would never have described herself as a brilliant communicator. She did not have, I can guarantee you, vast tracts of the Bible memorized. We don't know about whether she had a perseverant personality, but she doesn't come across as somebody that's overly domineering, does she? In fact, this little slave girl is a great person for us to remember. Because the one thing she has is an unshakable faith that God is still alive and does stuff. That God is still active in the world. And so away she goes, you know, away she goes. And I just love that about her. I think it's so encouraging for us. She had low education and resources. She was no doubt isolated by her very status, but she also had a heart for this man Naaman. Now, think about that for a minute. This is a little girl that was stolen away from her homeland. She is in a position of powerlessness in this home. And yet, somehow, she finds it in her heart to seek the good of someone. And she is confident that that good can actually be shared and make a difference. So we have this domino effect, and this story is a great one for us to remember because, you know, sometimes when we think about sharing our faith, we behave a lot like agnostics. We aren't really sure that there is a God orchestrating all of this. Because you can't read this story without thinking God is somehow pulling this man Naaman toward himself. Somehow God is at work. He's got these two crazy kings writing letters. He's got Elisha who isn't performing the way Naaman thinks he should perform. But you've got, nevertheless, a message being transmitted. Well, for us, we sometimes think, if I don't have all my act together, and have the perfect gospel message committed to memory, poor, hamstrung God. That's how we actually behave. Poor, hamstrung God. Well, you cannot read the conversion stories of Scripture without realizing that God is at work all over the place. He is already stirring up a curiosity in people, and with or without us often. I mean, I've met people, you meet these people, Andrew's got a million stories, I'm sure too. You meet people who tell you the craziest reasons that they came to faith. I had a couple come and tell me that they went to see the movie Elizabeth. Remember when it came out? It came out in the 90s. They saw the movie Elizabeth, and that was the thing that sparked their interest. I have crazier stories than that. So the point is, God is calling people. God wants to be known. He is stirring up people's interest, and the church really just needs to say, I'm going to share the one piece that I know. And we're going to get to that piece in a minute. But I hope when you remember this little girl, you remember that she spoke into her sphere of influence. So what I'd like you to do for a minute now is think about what your sphere of influence is. Sometimes, I'll hear people say, well, evangelism, that's for the young ones. And I'm like, really? Show me where it says that only the young ones are to share their faith, because I don't actually see that. And every older person has also a sphere of influence, and guess who it is? Often grandchildren, some of whom may not have heard about God. Now, sure, it gets complicated. You're not going to be teaching things that your kids, if they have left the church, if they are not teaching your children, you're not wanting to do something that is going to cause your kids to, never want to see you again. But my experience is that there are very few adult children who mind a grandma or grandpa telling their grandchildren why they believe there's a God. I just haven't seen it. So I hope that you grandparents will embrace a sphere of influence that nobody else has. You do not know the power of that role to influence your grandchildren's lives. What about the rest of us? Do you have colleagues at work? A story that I heard about a year ago, one of my favorites, I came out of a service at St. Paul's, and there was a woman there, and it's a large church, so I'm never sure to ask people, are you new? Because they might actually have been there longer than I've been there. Nevertheless, I said, I don't think I've met you before. Are you new? She said, it's the first time I'm back in church in 20 years. I said, I hope you don't mind me asking you this question, but I just have to ask you this question. What brought you back? She said, well, this week at work, I was in a team meeting and I had a complete meltdown in the middle of the meeting. I had to go back to my own cubicle. I was a mess. And one of my colleagues at work came in and said this to me. It sounds like you need a stabilizing force in your life. Have you ever thought about going back to church? Because I can pick you up on Sunday. Now here's the funny part. For some reason, he wasn't actually able to pick her up on Sunday. She came by herself, which I thought was extraordinary. But the thing is, he spoke into his sphere of influence something very simple. He didn't have the whole Bible memorized. He didn't have a tract ready to pull out of his back pocket. But there she was. And I said, I hope you'll come back. She said, I will. Now last Sunday, I was at another church. I was there for a confirmation service. Here's another story I heard. These two people, they used to work as teachers in the same school. They bumped into each other at the mall. Both of them had been retired for several years. And the female teacher who worked as a librarian says to the male science teacher, I think he was, so what are you doing now? He says, well, since I've retired, I renovated my basement and now I sit in it. And she said, well, on Sundays, why don't you come sit with me at my church? It'll give you a change of venue. Didn't he come? And on this particular Sunday, he was helping to administer communion. He'd been there a while now. See, sometimes we forget that our sphere of influence, it doesn't need to be that big. Are we willing to speak into it? Is the question, right? So I hope that we'll remember the whole thing about sphere of influence and this little slave girl. Because the most important thing is that we need to trust that God is already at work in somebody's life. And it's not the worst thing. If that guy had said to her, are you kidding? Me in church? No, the sky would fall. No way. Well, actually, she would still be standing if he said that to her, right? It's okay. But what if she hadn't said it to him? He wouldn't be there today. He wouldn't be finding the life that he has found in the faith in which he's found it. So I think the last thing I want to mention about this story is Gehazi. We need to be really clear about why we want to share our faith. Gehazi had an ulterior motive. He wanted money. When I tell about this story to clergy, I say, be sure you just don't want more people to sign up for envelopes or PAR. Because it doesn't go well for Gehazi. If the rebuilding of crumbling institutions is our reason for sharing our faith, that's a mighty poor reason. So don't share it because you see fewer people in the pews on a Sunday because you want to get that warm and fuzzy feeling on a Sunday morning. That too is a terrible reason. That's more like a notch in your belt. The reason you want to share the faith is because there's something real to it. Because it's truth. Because it brings healing and wholeness, because it teaches people about forgiveness, because it allows them an opportunity for confession, all of these things that bring life, because it can change the way they work in the workplace. When we look across the pages of any newspaper today, and the thing I keep saying to my husband, I'm sure he's getting sick of it, I say, everything comes down to ethics. Whether you work in finance or the medical profession or education, whether you are in manufacturing, anytime we open up a newspaper and we see a disastrous story, it's because there is something missing in people. So the faith matters. Evangelism is not as hard as we've made it out to be. Okay, So if we are thinking about this story and we want to think about what do we learn from this story, we can see that really the Holy Spirit is already at work. God is already at work pulling Nathan in. Maybe, you couldn't possibly imagine a crazier thing than a slave girl being the reason that Naaman gets healed and finds the living God. It's about sharing the good news. She shares good news, doesn't she? To help someone take steps. So she doesn't control, this little slave girl, she doesn't control the whole thing. She's just helping him take the step of that first movement, heading out on his way. And God has other people that are going to help him find his way. Elisha helps him find his way. The messenger that's part of his entourage helps him find the way. God even used these two crazy kings to help Naaman find his way. But what we're after is helping people walk the Christian way. I like the word apprentice instead of disciple, because disciple is not a word that we use much in our world today. It's a biblical word, but it has taken on connotations when Christians talk about it, about head knowledge, so student. I like the word apprentice because an apprentice, I don't know if there's anybody here that works in the trades and has done an apprenticeship, but an apprenticeship it's an active thing. You have to be doing as you're learning. And that's really what the Christian life is about, right? It's not about assenting to a set of propositions. It is about a new way of life. It's about joining in the mission of God in this world. So it's not even about just this great General Naaman. It is about his healing. It is about him coming to know God. But God is going to use Naaman in ways that the text never even tells us about. God has used this little slave girl who has somehow come to know about this prophet Elisha, and so on, and so on, and so on it goes. There's a great new series, I haven't even looked at it all, but there's a video series out of a company called Olive Tree Media out of Australia that is called Jesus the Game Changer. And it looks at the way the teachings of Jesus have changed in history, the way we have viewed things like the value of a human being, wealth, the position of women and girls. It is a fascinating video series, and I highly recommend it to everybody who wants to study a series. It would make for a great small group study. So there's a bigger mission that we can be a part of when we take on the work of evangelism, because we are sharing something that is beyond just ourselves. Okay, so this story, I bet you never thought there was so much in the story of Naaman as that. I've talked at you for a long time. Now I want to get you to do something. So on your tables are some pieces of paper. Really quickly, so I don't want you to labor too much over this, but what I'd like you to do is grab a paper and maybe one of the colored markers. Or if you're a more serious type, you can use one of the plain old pens. I want you to draw some of the mountains and valleys of your life. I'd like you to think about where were the twists and turns of your life. So again, don't worry too much. You're not going to be showing this to anybody. But I'd like you to just take a piece of paper and we'll take about 2 minutes till 10 after 8 to draw your timeline of your life. Maybe there was something in your faith that challenged you in some way. So it could be a challenge, it could be a point of comfort. Your faith made some difference. Well, that might actually have been God doing something in my life. That word that was spoken to me, or that thing I heard, or that thing I read, that circumstance that changed the direction, that moment that brought some comfort or clarity, that might have been God. As pastors, we get to hear these crazy stories about people who have these complete turnarounds in their lives and the reasons they do. And then there's many people, of course, that don't have these dramatic turns, but they can often express something that has been deeply meaningful to them, but we often don't share about these things together, right? That is the preacher's job, to tell us about God. So we don't often have an opportunity to share these moments. One of the more incredible things that I heard, I had a guy come in to see me. I was very early in my ordained ministry, and he said he walked with a cane. I could see that he was not that old a guy, so I thought this guy's been through something physically demanding. He said, well, let me tell you my story. I was a functioning alcoholic. Nobody outside my family but me knew, but my family all knew. And he said, when my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I went on a complete bender, and I was in a terrible accident on the 401. My car was flipped, every bone in my body just about was broken. I was comatose, and he remained comatose for 2 months. While he was in a coma, he had a vision. And it was an actual vision of a figure. He really, he later sort of identified, well, maybe it was Jesus, but it was a figure who said to him, you're going to get a second chance at life. That was the message. I'm giving you a second chance at life. The problem was that during his recovery, he remained in a rehab hospital for several more months. During that time, his wife died, and his children had to live through that without their father the drunk. He had a 17-year-old son that would not speak to him. By the time he got out of hospital, he decided he was going to take this opportunity to live again. He joined AA. He began to recover physically. He was on the right road, but yet his son would not speak to him. However, one day in art class, his son, who was in, 7th grade, he must have been in grade 12 at that point, he was working with clay, and he had a piece of newsprint down on his desk, and he was working away with this clay, and he pulled the clay up, and there was a very little slip of newspaper attached to the clay. And what do you think the piece of newspaper that was attached to the clay? It was his mother's obituary. And somehow this 17-year-old son understood that to mean, your mother is okay, she's with me. You need to talk to your father. Now, how do you put any of that together? How did that young man, how does it happen that he's working with clay months and months after his mother has died? How does it happen that that bit of newspaper pulls up on his bit of clay and that he understands it in this way? And his father, who's sitting there talking to me, telling me this story, reaches into his pocket and he pulls out this piece of clay that's now in a nice little plastic container because that piece of clay was the bridge to his son. Now, I don't know how you make sense of stories like that without saying, God is at work there somehow in the midst of all of that. And you might say, well, it's coincidence, but as pastors, we hear these stories again and again and again and again. And there was a point in my life where I really doubted did God really exist? What was the evidence for God? But I would have a really hard time doing that now. I think that God is at work calling people all around us. And that if we just were in love enough with him to say to people, you could really use a stabilizing force in your life. Have you ever thought about coming to church? Or, well, now that you've finished your basement, how about come sit with me in church on Sunday? Or maybe, I'll pray with you about that. Or maybe, I know you're not into church and you don't believe the same things I do, but I do believe. And so I'm going to add you to my prayer list. Is that okay? Or how about this? Would you be interested in exploring some of those questions you have? Because there's an opportunity at our church to explore some of the questions that people who don't go to church have. See, evangelism is not a recipe. The best kind of evangelism is born out of relationship. And we all have these relationships. We have them with our children and our grandchildren, with our neighbors and our colleagues. We sometimes even have them with strangers. Many years ago now, my mom was an Aussie, and I was flying to a family reunion, and in those days you had to fly through Honolulu, and then you ended either Honolulu or Auckland. And so you leave Honolulu at some ungodly hour, 1 o'clock in the morning, everybody just goes to sleep. And then you're flying into Sydney and you're waking up and everybody feels like you're through the mill and they're gonna serve you breakfast and then you're getting off the plane. Well, there I was on the plane and sitting next to me is a woman from India. And so we got talking over breakfast. And I said, well, I spent the first 5 years of my life in India. And so she said, oh, why was that? And so, I'm always a little bit nervous to bring up the idea of missionaries. Missionaries is not a good word nowadays. But what the heck? I said, well, my dad was, an Anglican priest there, and he was in charge of a leprosy home, and my mom was an obstetrical nurse with the Methodists. And they met there, and they lived 15 years there. She said, she kind of bristled a little bit, and she said, and was your father successful? And I thought to myself, yikes. Like, how do I answer this and not make her more mad, because she's a little bit annoyed at me right now. So I said, I thought I'm just going to be honest. I said, you know what? I never heard him talk about numbers of people that became Christians. I never actually heard him talk about that. So I don't know how to answer your question, but I said what he talked about was the way people were changed when they realized that God loved them no matter what caste they were from. And immediately her eyes filled with tears. The plane landed, we never got to carry on the conversation, and we went our separate ways. But something happened there. There was some kind of seed. There was a reaction to a moment, and it's not for me to control. I have no idea what was happening for that woman. There was something in what I said that moved her. But what I think is there's going to be a lot of surprises in heaven. In fact, Jesus says that, right? He says there's going to be people with him who are going to say, well, what am I doing here? And then there's going to be some that will say, Lord, Lord. And he will say, I don't know you. So this should be really cautionary for us. The key thing is to share with people the love that we have found in Christ, right? The goodness the good news that we found. So that was a little bit of good news that I had heard my father tell me as a little child. The good news of somebody who has been told that they cannot allow their shadow to even cross the shadow of another person because they will defile that person. That is for that person to realize that God loves them no matter what caste they are from is good news. And that is not to say that there is nothing good in any other of the other great faiths of the world. I would never say that. But we are asked to share the good news that we have to share and to draw people as best we can to the person of Christ, because Christ transcends all the barriers and the boxes that we lay out. I love the verse that says, "No one comes to the Father but through me," seeing it not as an exclusionary verse that says, only the Presbyterians are getting in. But to see it as saying anybody who is in is there because of Christ. Anybody that we believe as Christians that what happened at the cross was profound enough to impact the entire cosmos, let alone the entire human race. So we can allow God to sort all of that out. Our job is to speak the good news that we have heard within the sphere of influence that we have. If we can do that, we will see an explosion of the Christian church in Canada. That I believe really strongly about. So if we were to ask, what does sharing our faith look like today? I actually think it starts with prayer. I believe all evangelism, all sharing of the good news, starts with prayer. And it could be a prayer as simple as this. Get out of bed in the morning and you say, God, help me to share some good news with somebody today. If every Christian in Canada were to start their day with that prayer, I'm convinced we would see some amazing things across this land. It starts with prayer because it positions us in the right place. It positions us as people who are understanding that this is a work of God, that this is God's good news, that this is something we are joining in on, but it's His mission. And so we don't want to somehow pretend that He's not driving the whole thing. So effective evangelism starts with prayer. Secondly, look and listen for the needs around you. The guy who was in the team meeting that day and shared with his friend, his colleague, the woman the retired teacher that bumped into her retired colleague, they were looking and listening for the needs around. And then speak however you can into that need. Extend invitations. Jesus was great at extending invitations. And whether it's to, I know a woman that she has moved a lot in her life because of her husband's work. And wherever she has moved, she started a book club on her street. And this is her mode of evangelism, is this book club. It's a vehicle for her to build relationships with her neighbors, and through that, they see something in her. They become curious. It's about relationship and sharing good news. And so whether your thing is quilting or woodworking, there's all kinds of ways in which you can use the things that God has gifted you with and your talents and interests. But for heaven's sake, use them as a way to extend invitations, and it's God's invitation that we're passing along. So there's also the case of not just evangelism being at the heart of individuals, but what does it look like when evangelism is at the heart of a church? Because I'm also convinced that this is something we need to again grapple with. So first of all, if evangelism is at the heart of a church, it will be assumed that there are explorers present. So sometimes people will say to a pastor, do we really have to announce the page that the Bible verse is found on? Because, or the hymn numbers are all written up on that nice carved board up there. Why do we have to announce all this stuff? Well, whether you do announce it or not, know why you do. If you do, I hope you're announcing it because you think that there might be somebody that doesn't know what those numbers on the board are. That there might be explorers present. When I work with students and talk about preaching evangelistically, I will say, now take this sermon back and hear it through the ears of somebody that's never been in church before. And see what you will write differently, how you might word things differently. Because I think it will also show up in the language in worship. Now, worship is something we offer to God. It's not a tool for evangelism. That would be terrible. God is the object of our worship, and He is the subject of our worship. Nevertheless, worship is something that can be actually evangelistic for people that come. A crazy story I had was a young woman who showed up in church, and I said to her, I haven't seen you before. She said, no, I've never been in church before. I said, what brought you to church? She said, the royal wedding. The royal wedding was an evangelistic tool for this young woman. And I said, well, what was it? She said, well, I wanted to figure out why Will and Kate had anything to do with God in their marriage. And I was thinking to myself, this was my inside voice. You know that he's going to be the head of the Church of England one day, don't you? I didn't say that. But, so here she was, and so I said, well, what does she think of the service? She said, is there a Q&A? Because I have so many questions about what we just did here. And I said, yes. Wednesday, we'll meet for coffee at 10 a.m. Can you do it? She said, yes, I can. She comes in, she says, it's kind of weird how everybody stands up and sings at the same time. I mean, it's natural for us, right? We understand hymn singing. But if you think about a completely unchurched person, how often do they get together with all kinds of people and sing something that everybody knows? Maybe the national anthem at a hockey game, maybe. But it's a rare phenomenon. So this felt very strange to her. She had no idea what the going forward and receiving bread and wine thing was about. No clue. Now, see, we think everybody knows this stuff because we are in a Christian country. But what we don't realize is there's a lot of people that actually have zero, nada, when it comes to understanding. So she comes back the next week, and then she comes back the next week. She comes into my office during the midweek after her third time there, and she said, I want to know why I always cry when I come here. And I said, well, I don't know for sure. But I said, I think it's a little like when you go to the airport and you're going to meet somebody that is somebody you haven't seen for 40 years, and then they come through the doors. And that's a powerful feeling. It's because you have been deprived of knowing the God who made you and loves you, and who you were made to love. And when you first get an inkling of that, it can make you cry. Thank goodness she didn't say, no, that's not it. Because I would have felt pretty foolish. She said, maybe you're right. When evangelism is at the heart of a church, it will be reflected in your church budget. I say to churches, I'll sometimes do workshops on the missional orientation of churches, and I'll ask them to bring their budget. And it's quite telling. There ought to be lines in there that you can say, that is for evangelism. That's going to help us connect us to unchurched people. That's a program we're running. Those are those little pamphlets that we put here, there, or everywhere. That's how much we spent having an unchurched person assess our website. Where is it in your budget? It will be reflected in your programs. Do you offer something that helps unchurched people address their questions? And is it something that anybody could just invite someone to and come along with? So it doesn't need to be, the Alpha course is one that sometimes is used by churches, but there's lots of really excellent resources out there. Where is it in your programs? It will be evidenced in our friendships. If we really understand that God has made a difference, when you filled in those lifelines and you could pinpoint something that made a difference in your life that is faith related, that's the very thing that you can share with someone. You don't need to have the Bible memorized. Share that thing. But you can only do that if you actually have friendships, real relationships with people and there's lots of them out there. We have a huge market share, let's put it that way. Many adult baptisms will be the norm in churches where evangelism is at the center. This is a challenging thing though, because sometimes when I put that up, people think, oh, okay, then it must be the preacher's job to do all this. If it's about baptisms, because he or she does the baptisms. Really, we know that's crazy, right? That the work of sharing the faith, that's actually more on the lay people of a church. Because the pastor's job is to shepherd. Yes, he's going to go after that sheep that falls off the ledge. Yeah, for sure. But he is taking care, he's nurturing, feeding, equipping. But the truth of the matter is, think about it, it doesn't make any sense. If Andrew is the only one that's going to be sharing the faith in this room, we have really minimized our potential hugely. And he's one of the best preachers in town. Imagine, I went into a church that was, doing pretty well. I said, what if everybody in this church made a point of discipling one person over the next year? One person, whether it be a child or a friend of their own child. I met a woman who said to me, she became a Christian because her friend got a gold star if she brought somebody to Sunday school. She said, I'm so glad I was worth a gold star. She's a pastor today. She's a Pentecostal pastor out west. So these are small things, right? Do we teach our children that they have something to say about God? Many kids actually are amazing this way. There was a kid, children's talks are very hazardous. I don't know if you have kids' talks here, but they can be hazardous at times. You never know what kids are going to say, right? I was doing a children's talk, and I said, what if you lost your very favorite toy and couldn't find it, and you searched for it everywhere? The message that day was the woman who lost the gold coin and swept her house, etc. to find it. And this one little girl, Lydia, she said, I lost my Barbie. She was gone for weeks and I couldn't find her. And eventually I found her. And I said, well, what did you do when you found Barbie? She said, I played with her all day. I said, well, what if there were people who felt they got lost from God? And Lydia says, well, that can't happen. I said, why not? She said, because God's everywhere. You can't ever get lost from God. And I'm thinking, oh, this is so gone wrong. My whole story is shot here, but this kid's really got a point. And I said, well, Lydia, what you said is true. But I said, there are people that think they are lost from God because they think that they've done enough stuff that God doesn't want to have anything to do with them. Or they think God is angry and they don't want to have anything to do with an angry God. There's all kinds of reasons that people themselves feel lost from God. She says, well, then we have to tell them. Just like that. You know, if we can actually, if all the people in this room prayed fervently that God would show them the people that they can share a piece of good news with. The good news of Christ. The good news of healing and wholeness and forgiveness and all of that. A good news of a word of hope. In a world that, you know, let's face it, looks a bit kooky right now. So these are signs of evangelism at the heart of a church. But where would you begin as a church? I actually think that we need to, again, pull together a group. Maybe it's a very small group. Maybe it's 4 or 5 people or 2 or 3 people who actually commit to a ministry of prayer. Actually thinking about asking God to draw the church as a whole closer, that God will stir up the curiosity of explorers. Because let's face it, there are actually a lot of people in our world today who are not thinking very much about God. But I believe there's things all around them that might cause them to do so. And I think there's something about a movement of the Spirit in that. So I think that's something we can actually pray for. That God will make you aware of all the opportunities for conversations or comments. Many years ago, I had a very, very good friend who was a staunch atheist. And for some reason, Ursula and I just clicked. We clicked out of all things at a baby shower. We got talking. We ended up being fast friends. Her children were the same age as ours. We both had little kids at that time. And so there was this one day, Ursula was coming over to my house. And I thought, okay, this will be the day. I'm gonna share the gospel with Ursula. So I thought the first step is I'm going to put in a cassette tape that has Christian music on it. This was my plan. And so just before Ursula gets in the car, I grab this tape, I put it in the cassette deck, and for some reason, there's some kind of spring, something goes wrong. The cassette literally flies out of the cassette deck, hits me in the nose, like takes a nick off my nose. So now I've got some blood coming down my nose. And I'm thinking, okay, I get the message. Like, relax, you know. So forget the cassette tape. Kids puts on a VeggieTales DVD. And Ursula's kids all sit down and start watching this DVD. My kids aren't watching it. They've seen it before. But Ursula's kids are watching it. And then Ursula and I are sitting at the coffee table, having a coffee, and she says, look at that. my kids are watching that thing that's talking about the Bible, and your kids are off doing other stuff. Totally, that's a riot. And I said, why are your kids interested in that? And she said, that's a good question. I'm going to talk to them about that. And so the conversation actually unfolded in a much more natural way, a less forced way, and we ended up in a really good conversation that day. I've often wondered about Ursula because about 3 months after that conversation, she moved away. And we've lost touch. But the funny thing was, I wrote to her Christmas letters, the things you send out talking about what's happening in your family. And I never heard back from Ursula. But one year, I had a note back from her daughter saying, I thought somebody in our family better reply to your letters. Which I thought was a riot. And I was thinking, oh, I hope Ursula doesn't find out about this. But it was really a touching note. And she signed it off with love and prayers. And I thought, wow, that's weird. That sounds like a God thing. So, okay, I can't even remember now why I told you that story. But opportunities for conversations, they don't have to be orchestrated. That God will give you a passion to share. These are things we can actually pray for, I believe. That this is something real that can happen, right? Okay, so after you start to pray, then what? I think it's fantastic to read together and discuss conversion stories. How do people come to faith in the Bible? How does it happen? The more you actually do that, the more you learn about actual healthy evangelism. Sometimes it's fast, sudden, weird. Like if you think about the conversion of St. Paul, that's pretty weird. And then you think about Peter's journey, how Andrew brings Peter, how many of that first group of disciples, they actually come because a brother invited them or a friend. What prompts the inquiry in these stories? What's the need? Who does and says what? What is the outcome? And what do we actually learn about God in this story? So if you think about the story of Naaman, we learn that God is so outside the box, right? Naaman is apparently still going to be going into the temple of Rimmon, even though he knows the living God and has taken some dirt from Israel to prove it. But he's still going to go to the temple of Rimmon, and Elisha says to him, go in peace. See, God is bigger than any of the boxes we build. But what do we learn about God from these stories? This can actually help us to be the people that we're called to be, sharing our story of faith. Thirdly, examine what you offer in your church as bridges into the faith for explorers and seekers. So, are there easy entry social events? Sometimes I knew a church that did a Valentine's dinner and dance. This was years ago now, 20 years ago. Literally, that was one of the most evangelistic events because everybody enjoyed inviting their neighbors and friends to it. It was a gas, they did it up really well, and it was a way in for people to at least feel like, oh, yeah, this church isn't so bad. I recognize that person over there, and I had a conversation with that one. What about opportunities to explore questions? And here's one, opportunities to actually make a commitment. Now, in your tradition, I don't know all the different ways in which that would be a natural thing to work into your worship. As Anglicans, we have this thing, we have liturgy for everything. That's our big deal. So we have this thing called a service of reaffirmation. Of course, we also have adult baptisms for somebody that isn't baptized. But if somebody's already been baptized and then maybe they weren't in church for 50 years, every year we would have a service of adult reaffirmation in which people that had taken some kind of significant step in their life could make a public proclamation of that, in a sense, right? So what we would do is we would have them write out maybe one paragraph about why they were taking that step. And I would say to them, this is going to be one of the few opportunities in your life maybe in which you get to share the faith with 250 people. And they would go, I never thought about it that way. Make some kind of opportunity for people to actually take that step of commitment when they're ready. So, where would we leave you with? Think of a friend with no present church connection. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a colleague. Now, in Canadian society, I know this is tricky because, I had a friend that moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, and she said, question number 2 in Little Rock is, what church do you go to? So as Canadians, we don't ask each other these questions. So it actually might be a little tricky to find out who the unchurched people are. But hey, that's not a bad conversation to have. Ask God to open a door for you to, in some way, find out where people are at. But oftentimes, people just need an opportunity. So say there's some kind of event happening at your church, and you say, well, would you like to come? And they say, well, no, actually, there's something on at our church that particular night, or no, we've already got a church home. And you go, oh, that's great, okay. But don't assume that they do, because remember those stats I gave you at the beginning. Less than 20% of Canadian society has any church family connection, any actual association with a particular church. Pray for them. Simply pray for them. And pray that you will be able to share with them. So again, this may sound like an esoteric step, but I actually think this is the most important step of the whole thing. Prayer. Strengthen, build on your relationship. So evangelism actually requires time. And it's something, sadly, we're mostly lacking in our culture today. We spend so much time in front of screens now that there's less opportunity to do this. So invite people for dinner. Have a wine and cheese Christmas thing. I know somebody in one of the condos that decided to have a wine and cheese party for their floor. And they went and they literally put little invites under the doors. And they were astonished at the people that came. Because everybody's living very isolated lives. Strengthen your relationship, listen for the needs and questions, but invite them to explore with you. I was astonished early March, I went back to preach at a church that I had done a student placement at 20 years ago. And there was a woman there. I was so excited to see her because 20 years ago, her husband had died. She had no church connection, but she had an inkling, I don't know whether her mother was Anglican or something. She didn't mind coming to an Anglican church to get all the funeral stuff done, and she realized that she needed some kind of spiritual support. So her friend, who was a Baptist, came for a year to the Anglican church with her. Now that is a hard thing for Baptists to do, I'm telling you. To sit through all that liturgy. But here that woman was still there 20 years later. The Baptist wasn't. She didn't need to be. She had gone back to her tradition, but now this person had found a home and a root at St. Bride's Clarkson Anglican Church. And there she was 20 years later, and she still remembered me, which was so sweet. See, it's about relationship. That's what sharing the faith is. And it's not a recipe, it's not a mechanism, it's about relationship. Walk with them, trusting God to be at work. So if you came tonight looking for a recipe, I hope you're not disappointed. I hope you're freed. I hope you're compelled. Because, I truly believe God is on the cusp of something big in our country. I can't explain why the people coming in to study for ministry are getting younger in the last decade. I can't explain that, except to say, almost all of them are in their 20s and early 30s now. This was not true 20 years ago. So I'm saying to myself, God is planning something big. And he needs people that are going to be trained and ready to be pastoring churches. I think God is getting us ready for a sharing of faith again. There's a need for it. And we all know people who need a word of good news.
Amen.
So I want to thank you for being so good at listening. Everybody was so quiet. I thought people would be moving around and getting coffee and stuff, but you were so good. But really, it was an awesome evening with you, and I will be praying that you will be equipped to share the faith. You have this amazing structure in this amazing part of the city. You've got a great history. My mother was a Methodist, and I know you've got Methodist roots here.
Yeah, right.
You've got a fantastic preacher and leader in Andrew, and I can see that you've got a heart for evangelism. So wouldn't it be fantastic if God used Timothy Eaton Memorial Church in an awesome way? Wouldn't that just be a wonderful thing? So thanks, everybody, and maybe I can close with a prayer really quick, and then Bill's going to come and say something. Lord, we are so thankful for this time just to talk and think about the way you are alive and at work in this world, and the people that you're calling, and the extraordinary way you work. I pray, Lord, that you would stir up in us, just make us aware of the need all around us. Give us a word that we can share. Help us just to be natural in sharing our love for you. Draw us closer and closer and deeper into that love so that it is authentic. And we just thank you for all that you are to us and for all that you mean to this world. And we give thanks in Jesus' name.